What do you make of Marx's criticism of business secrecy, adulteration of products, profiting from poverty, monopoly pricing, and those whose interests are opposed to that of the public? This comes from the Marxist study guide. I posted the complete question. I'm not sure if you can see it. I can see it for sure. Sorry, I was just finishing my ramble. Criticism of adulteration of the product, profiteering from poverty, monopoly pricing, and people whose interests are opposed to the public. I mean, it's absolutely true. Sorry, a police officer just drove by my house. That was scary. It just always makes me like, ugh, the cops, a cab. Um, but yeah, I mean, the interests of the bourgeoisie are opposed to the public because of competition, like you said, and well, mainly competition. It mainly stems from competition, right? Because corporations need to constantly expand. They need to constantly make a profit. They need to accumulate capital. These things are all true. But the reason that they have to constantly expand is because if they don't, they'll go out of business, right? If they're not constantly expanding, constantly increasing the amount of profit they're making, then they're going to be outcompeted by their competitors in the market, people who are investing in innovation and expanding their productive output and marketing and lobbying the government in all these things. So you have businesses who are act in secrecy. Like a good example of that would be intellectual property laws. Businesses act in secrecy and they keep their information about the market and about consumer demand and about what people need and new technologies that they develop, innovative products that they develop. Even if those products are, say, like medicine, like insulin, that could help tons and tons of people, they're going to keep the patent on that. They're going to use intellectual property laws to keep that patent, maintain secrecy so that they can maximize their own profits. And that's directly antagonistic to what's good for the public. Great example here, since I was just talking about it and reading about it, the opioid epidemic, right? They know now that corporations created webs of influence that included government institutions, academia, etc., in order to lie about opioids so that they could expand the market, so that they could start prescribing opioids for pain and anxiety, which made millions and millions of dollars for the pharmaceutical company. And they knew all along that it would increase addiction and probably lead to deaths, which, now in America we have 60,000, it's either 60,000 opioid related overdoses a year or 60,000 total overdoses a year, and like 80% of them are opioids, especially fentanyl. Either way, just an astronomical number. So, there's a way that corporate secrecy and corporate lying was used to make profits in the market, but was directly antagonistic to the interests of the public. Adulteration of products. I can't remember what Marx means by adulteration. I always have to look up definitions of some of the words he uses. Making something poor in quality. Yeah, there's another, like, that's why we had to have the FDA. Why the FDA had to come about, and I don't even know when that was. When was the FDA created? 1906. Because, like, corporations, because, like I said, they're just trying to make as much money as they can, and compete with other firms in the market. Like, if they could make bread with sawdust in it and the consumers aren't going to notice, they're going to put sawdust in the bread because it's a cheaper material than flour or wheat or whatever it actually takes to make bread. So we had to have the FDA to regulate corporations, make sure they're not purposefully adulterating their products, their food products that we consume, making them cheaper and less healthy for you. Even though, that largely hasn't worked. The FDA is largely co-opted by corporations too. Again, all driven by market competition, right? If I am a baker and there's another baker in this area and we share the same market, we have the same pool of consumers that we're trying to sell our bread to, and I start putting 50% sawdust in my bread, and nobody notices, even though it's unhealthy for the people, even though it's not in the public interest for me to put sawdust in my bread because it's making people unhealthy, it's ruining public health. It helps me within the market competition, right? It helps me spend less on the productive commodities, the materials needed to make my bread. So then I can sell it and make more profit from the sale. My margins will be higher than the competitors, and eventually I can buy out my competitors or force them out of the market. Um, Profiting from poverty. We'll talk about a little bit of how corporations profit from poverty today, in the modern day, later in the stream. Um, Monopoly pricing. Yeah, if there's no competitors in the market, or if corporations are working together, collaborating to screw people, obviously they can set prices a lot easier, because competition, if I have a competitor over there selling the same thing as me, I can't just raise my price super high, or people will just go buy from my competitor. um, People whose interests, and yeah, that's why the capitalist interests are directly opposed to the interests of the public. And important point, that's why they can't help it, right? That's why it's not that the capitalists are just bad evil people who were born hating poors and hating the working class, right? They have to continually expand, have to continually grow their capital, grow the amount of surplus value that they're siphoning from the labor of the workers. Otherwise, they will be pushed out of business by their competitors. So the market system itself, capitalism itself, commodity production itself is directly antagonistic. It's contradictory. It encourages production that's antagonistic with the interests of the public, which is how corporations and conglomerates who have the most control over public health, the health of populations in the U.S., literally lied so that they could sell more opioids, which destroyed public health. Probably the biggest public health disaster of the last 20 years outside of the COVID pandemic. And they knew it was going to happen the whole time, but they still lied and actively formed webs of influence so that they could expand their markets and bring in more exchange value. And again, the way I like to conceptualize this, as Marx does in the first 3 chapters of Capital: exchange value versus use value. Use value, you can't quantify it, you can't put a number on it. It's how much use that a product gives to or brings to the person who buys it, or to populations of people. And you can't sell a product, even under capitalism, unless it has some kind of use value. Otherwise, nobody will buy it. But then the exchange value is how much a commodity is worth in comparison to the other commodities in circulation, which is measured as price, right? And capitalists are after exchange value, right? They're trying to produce a product for as cheaply as possible, which, like we said, can cause them to do things like put sawdust in their bread. Produce it as cheaply as possible and sell it for as high of a price as possible, which is, why we have so much money go into marketing, to try and artificially inflate that price and artificially inflate consumer demand for the product. So then, rather than focusing on use value, how much use products and commodities can bring, or not commodities, but products can bring to populations, can bring to the people, corporations engaging in market activity and subject to market competition are only focused on exchange value. On, like we said, creating cheap products that they can sell for a high price, make surplus value, use that surplus value to expand their empire. And yeah, when you look at the opioid epidemic, and this is part of the reason I'm doing the Journal of American Socialist Studies too, on the healthcare industry. Also because I've been studying healthcare, and also because 20% of America's GDP is healthcare spending. So it makes up a huge part of our economy, and the conglomerates who dominate the healthcare industry are some of the most powerful conglomerates in our overall economy. But also because the things like the opioid epidemic provide such a great example of how corporations put exchange value above use value, right? The use value of opioids, not to say they're useless, or they should be completely done away with, or they can't be used, to help people with certain conditions. But they knew that the use value of opioids would get people addicted and lead to death. Right? It leads people to continue buying opioids. They eventually run out of money. They can't afford the opioids, or they can't get a prescription anymore because the doctors blacklist them once they develop an addiction and a dependency, and then they switch to what's cheaper, which is heroin. So the use value of opioids literally gets people addicted to heroin or fentanyl and kills them. But they still sold them. They still expanded the market for them while knowing this, because exchange value comes first for them. Surplus value comes first for them. So that's how the capitalist interests are directly opposed to the interests of the public. That's what Marx is talking about for the most part, and that's how the capitalist market system, the most highly developed form of commodity production, is antagonistic to the interests of the working class. And that's why we have to overthrow the capitalists and move to a new system.